A farmer stood in front of bulldozers to save his land, but just 48 hours later, military tanks rolled onto his field and left everyone speechless. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. Beneath the wide skies of southern Tennessee, a craggy old farmer named Bill Thacker walked the perimeter of his 300-acre farm. He wore mud-caked boots, threadbare overalls, and a look that told stories of weathered storms and battered hopes. For decades, these rolling fields had yielded hay and corn, feeding not only Bill's cattle but also the deep pride that kept him rooted to the land his grandfather had once cleared by hand. Ever since he was a boy, Bill had heard the tales of big developers descending on small towns, promising modernization, but delivering heartbreak. He never imagined they would set their sights on him. Yet that morning, a heavy rumble on the dusty road signaled a confrontation he had always dreaded. 4 bulldozers, each flanked by men in crisp suits, arrived at his main gate. The corporate logo on their vehicles read, Sagemont Industries, a name he recognized from local rumors about a pipeline set to cut across farmland throughout the region. His old border collie, Dolly, barked as the convoy approached. Bill's heart pounded, but he forced himself to remain outwardly calm. He had never sought a fight, yet he wouldn't run now that trouble had landed on his doorstep. This place was more than just soil and harvest. It was the living history of his family. One of the suits stepped out. With a rehearsed smile, he introduced himself as Mark Leland, their land acquisition specialist. Mark's voice carried the clipped confidence of a corporate man used to being in control. He offered Bill a handshake that Bill did not return. Instead, the old farmer stared at the bulldozers, ignoring Mark's cordial greeting. "Mr. Thacker, we're here to start preliminary work on the Sagemont Southeastern Pipeline. According to our records, we have the legal right-of-way to run it across your west fields. The compensation package was sent to your address months ago." Bill's jaw clenched. He remembered the letter that had come with the developer's emblem. He had tossed it into the old trunk in his barn, thinking it was just another threat. "This land was never for sale," Bill growled. "I told your people that a dozen times. You show up with big machines talking about rights. Well, I've got rights too. My granddaddy's grave is on that hillside, and I won't let you tear it up for a pipeline." Mark signaled to the bulldozer operators to power up. "I'm afraid we must proceed, sir. I'd prefer your cooperation. The compensation is fair, and we have legal orders from the county." In Bill's mind, something snapped. He stepped forward, placing himself directly in front of the lead bulldozer. The driver hesitated, uncertain. Dust clouds rose in the air, swirling around Bill's boots. Dolly barked louder, as though warning them all to stand down. "Move aside, Mr. Thacker," Mark insisted, tension creeping into his voice. "We have a job to do, and you're trespassing on a designated construction zone." "Trespassing? On my own land?" Bill's voice thundered across the field. "I've shed sweat here since I could hold a shovel. My father and grandfather are buried by that oak. You expect me to stand aside while you rip up their resting place?" The bulldozer roared, its engine a metallic snarl. Bill refused to budge. For one drawn-out moment, it felt as though the entire world held its breath, uncertain whether that massive machine would lurch forward or back away. Then the driver killed the engine. Mark glared at Bill. "We'll get law enforcement involved if you obstruct. You can't stop progress, old man." Bill's hands were balled into fists. "Call the sheriff if you want," he said. "I know her. She knows me. This farm is my life, and I won't be scared off by fancy lawyers or corporate bullying." Uncertain murmurs rippled among the work crew. They had dealt with protests before, but seldom had they faced a lone farmer standing in front of heavy equipment, unwavering. The tension thickened, and Mark, seeing the spectacle building, pulled out his phone. "Have it your way," he said, stepping aside to place a call. For an hour, Bill held his ground, the suits huddled by their trucks, presumably calling superiors. The bulldozer operators milled around, smoking cigarettes and avoiding Bill's gaze. Dolly sat by Bill's feet, panting in the July heat, but loyal as ever. Finally, a county sheriff's cruiser rolled up. Out stepped Sheriff Wanda Poole, a stern but fair woman who had known Bill since high school. As she approached, Bill saw the conflict in her eyes. She had a duty to keep order, but she'd also grown up in these fields, grateful for produce that Bill's father once sold at discount prices whenever times got lean. She listened to Mark's explanation, examined the papers, then approached Bill gently. "They have a valid order, Bill," she said quietly. "You can't block them." Bill's heart sank, but he still refused to move. "They might have an order," he said, "but that doesn't make it right. Wanda, you know what this place means to me." She lowered her voice. "I understand, but they'll arrest you if you continue obstructing." His response was simple. "Let them." Reluctantly, Wanda motioned for her deputy to handcuff him. Dolly barked in dismay. The suits looked on with smug expressions as Bill was led to the cruiser. But just as he was being placed in the back seat, something unexpected happened. The bulldozers revved up again, yet the second operator spotted a sinkhole near the hill's base, possibly from old drainage lines. Waving his arms, he warned Mark that the ground might not hold. "What do you mean, a sinkhole?" Mark demanded, striding over. The driver hopped down, pointing to a widening depression. Mark cursed under his breath. They'd need to bring in geologists, or risk losing their machines in collapsing ground. Bill, half inside the cruiser, allowed himself a wry smile. The land was fighting back in its own quiet way. The developers postponed further action for the day. Bill was released with a warning. As the sun set behind the sycamore trees, he returned to find half of his west field flagged and flattened, where the bulldozers had churned the grass. The sight churned his stomach. He trudged into his farmhouse, its walls lined with black and white photos of ancestors who had tamed these fields long ago. Dolly trotted behind, head hung low. That evening, Bill tried to eat but couldn't. Instead, he dug out old county maps from the barn, scouring them for anything that might protect his land. He discovered a reference to a possible historical site, an old Civil War battlefield, rumored to overlap his acreage. "If I can prove this farmland is protected," Bill mused, "maybe I can stall them long enough to find a permanent solution." Late into the night, he called the local historical society, but nobody answered. He left voicemail messages, detailing the developer's incursion and asking for urgent help. With each unanswered ring, his frustration grew. Sagemont Industries had the money and the influence to push through obstacles quickly. At sunrise, Bill stepped onto his porch. Dolly hopped at his heels, tail wagging. He grabbed a shovel, resolving to examine the rumored site himself. The morning dew soaked his boots as he trudged across the western slope. There, in a grove of hickory trees, he dug up shards of old metal, possibly from a cavalry skirmish. He snapped pictures on his outdated phone, betting that an archaeologist could confirm their significance. But would it be enough? Or would the pipeline permit override everything? By mid-morning, he got an unexpected call from Dr. Marianne Rourke, a professor at the local college who specialized in Civil War artifacts. "Mr. Thacker," she said, sounding curious and a little alarmed, "I got your messages. I can come out tomorrow with a small team to investigate, but I can't promise immediate legal protection." "Tomorrow's better than never," Bill replied. "I'll meet you at dawn." Just as Bill hung up, Dolly started barking like mad. He spun around to see a new convoy of vehicles approaching. No corporate logos this time, just olive green trucks rumbling across the farmland. His pulse raced. Why would the military show up? Within minutes, a stern-faced colonel stepped out, flanked by uniformed troops. They eyed Bill, then singled him out. "We're here under orders to secure this sector," the colonel declared, voice crisp with authority. Our engineers are set to coordinate with Sagemont for a pipeline that meets national security objectives. Bill's stomach twisted. National security? You setting up a base on my land? The colonel's gaze remained impassive. That depends on whether you cooperate. We have an agreement with Sagemont, and they tell us you're interfering. Rage flared inside Bill. So first you send the sheriff, then you bring the army to force me out? This is my home, Colonel. I'm not leaving. The colonel's expression never changed. Sir, if you persist, we'll have no choice but to treat this as a federal obstruction. Bill, stunned at how quickly things had escalated, saw the trucks parking in his yard. Less than a day ago, he'd stood up to bulldozers alone. Now, military vehicles were stationed on his property. He could almost hear his grandfather's voice telling him never to back down. Dolly whimpered at his side, sensing his fear. Bill steeled himself, preparing yet again to stand his ground. What he didn't know was that within 48 hours, the farmland would become the stage for something far bigger than a pipeline dispute, something that would shake the entire county and force Bill to confront the deepest meaning of courage and sacrifice. After the colonel's abrupt appearance, Bill spent the remainder of that sweltering afternoon in silent defiance, his gaze drifting from the glint of the soldiers' weapons to the trampled rows of corn behind them. Dolly whined at his feet, her muzzle flecked with dust. From across the field, Mark Leland studied Bill with thinly veiled triumph. Clearly, Sagemont Industries had found an even heavier hand to back its incursion, the U.S. military itself. Bill couldn't imagine how that partnership had come to be, but the colonel had made one thing clear. Any attempt to halt the pipeline was now deemed an obstacle to national interests. When twilight arrived, Bill retreated into his modest farmhouse. Its walls, once a source of comfort, now felt like a last bastion under siege. He peered through the kitchen window, seeing the silhouettes of soldiers patrolling near the oak tree that sheltered his grandfather's grave. The sight churned his insides. He had always viewed his land as sacred ground. Now it looked like a battlefield waiting for the first shot to be fired. Over a lukewarm cup of coffee, he dialed the sheriff's office. Wanda answered, her tone weary. Bill, I can't do much when the feds are involved. They outrank my department, you know that. I get it, Bill replied, voice hoarse. But what about the county commissioners, the mayor? Nobody's raising a word about how this pipeline got authorized. Wanda exhaled. Politics. Sagemont's been greasing palms around here for months. Nobody wants to cross them, especially now that the military's stepping in. You watch yourself, Bill. I don't want to find you arrested or worse. After hanging up, Bill rummaged in his barn for a battered old tent and a cooler. If those men intended to tear up his west field, he would stand guard all night. With Dolly at his side, he marched across the property until the harsh beam of a soldier's flashlight cut through the darkness. State your business, barked a young private, his rifle slung across his chest. Bill raised the tent bag in one hand. I'm pitching a tent. This is my land. The private hesitated. Orders say no unauthorized civilians are permitted near the designated pipeline route. Bill's jaw set. Son, I've been authorized by my father's sweat and my grandfather's bones. Now get out of my way. Something in Bill's voice made the private pause. Finally, with a frustrated shrug, he stepped aside. Bill continued toward the ridge, ignoring the rest of the soldiers watching him. He pitched his tent by moonlight, the shape of the farmland stretching around him like a protective cloak. Dolly curled up at the entrance, and Bill leaned against his battered truck parked behind him. Every so often, a soldier's footsteps crunched through the rows, but Bill did not stir. Sleep eluded him. Every hour he recalled the colonel's words. Federal obstruction. They had threatened to charge him if he wouldn't comply. He knew the next day would bring Dr. Rourke's archaeological team, and with them a glimmer of hope. But how would they gain access if the entire perimeter was under armed watch? At dawn, Bill rose, stiff and sore, to find a thick haze of dew over the fields. The private from the night before approached with a tin cup of coffee. He looked apologetic, even shy. "Figured you might need this," he muttered, glancing at Dolly. "Your dog won't bite, will she?" Bill grunted, accepting the coffee. Dolly wagged her tail, less guarded than her master. "What's your name, soldier?" Bill asked. "Private Martinez," he replied. "I'm from Texas." "You got family in farmland, Martinez?" Bill ventured. The private nodded. "My grandparents have a ranch. Never thought I'd be posted to push a pipeline through someone else's farm." Bill studied the young man. "Then you know how much this place means to me. If your colonel pushes me too hard, I'm not budging. I'd rather be locked up than watch my home destroyed." Martinez shifted uncomfortably, then gestured toward the horizon. "I can't say I agree with this mission, sir, but I follow orders. Maybe you can talk to Colonel Hastings. He's not an unreasonable man." The mention of the colonel's name roused Bill's bitterness. "He threatened me first day he arrived. That's not exactly a good start." Martinez nodded. "He's under pressure from the top, or so rumor has it. Something about an accelerated schedule, something about foreign policy." Bill nearly snorted. "Foreign policy in my backyard, that's sure a twist." He handed back the coffee cup. "Thanks for the drink, soldier." With that, Bill set off for the main drive, Dolly trotting behind. Sure enough, Mark Leland was there, conferring with the colonel and another corporate official. They looked up as Bill approached. The colonel's uniform bore a name patch reading Hastings. His face remained impassive. "Morning, Mr. Thacker. We trust you'll refrain from further interference today." Bill ignored him and addressed Mark Leland. "I've got an archaeological team arriving soon. Don't you try blocking them. They have every right to examine this land, especially if it's historically significant." Mark's expression was a forced politeness. "We're aware. We'll allow them onto the property, but under supervision. Don't expect it to halt construction. The Army Corps of Engineers has final say." Bill turned to Colonel Hastings. "You can supervise all you want, but if your men so much as intimidate Dr. Rourke's students, I'll raise every local news channel in the county." The colonel simply blinked. "We'll abide by standard procedure, Mr. Thacker, but let me remind you, any attempt to incite conflict on a federal project site can be met with force." Bill's cheeks reddened as he shot back, "Don't bully me with your tanks and your barbed wire. I'll stand on my land till the day I die." Without waiting for an answer, he whistled for Dolly and marched off. A short time later, 2 dust-covered vans rattled up the driveway. Dr. Marianne Rourke and her graduate students. Bill's heart soared. If anyone could help him prove historical significance, it was the local college team. As soon as they exited, Dr. Rourke greeted Bill with a warm handshake. "Thanks for calling me. Let's see what we've got." Soldiers watched warily while the students unpacked gear, metal detectors, brushes, a ground-penetrating radar. Bill led them to the grove near the hillside. Colonel Hastings followed, arms crossed. "We'll observe," he stated flatly. "Don't wander outside the flagged boundary." Dr. Rourke, unruffled by the colonel's attitude, began scanning the soil. "If there's a historic site here, we'll find evidence soon enough." Bill stood close, anxiety gnawing at him. This was his best hope. He stared into the distance, noticing fresh tire marks from Army vehicles. They had begun staging heavier equipment. The rumor of tanks rolling in was no rumor at all. He saw a transport carrier near the main gate. It seemed Bill's quiet farmland had become a militarized zone. Dolly lay beside him, tail wagging hopefully, as if sensing something was about to happen. For Bill, every second felt like a drumbeat of dread, waiting for whatever came next. Dr. Rourke paced across the grove with steady determination, occasionally instructing her students where to position the metal detectors. She was a short, pragmatic woman in her mid-50s, and despite the tense atmosphere, she seemed almost energized by the potential discovery. Her young assistants, though visibly uneasy under the watchful stares of the soldiers, followed her instructions meticulously. Bill stayed within earshot, but let them work. Part of him wanted to hover over every beep of the detectors, yet he knew not to interfere with the experts. Colonel Hastings maintained his silent vigil from a short distance away, arms folded as though bracing for a confrontation. Every now and again he radioed back to his men to confirm that all was quiet. Mark Leland took the opportunity to circle around the group, phone in hand, possibly snapping photos of the operation. Bill suspected he wanted to compile evidence in case Dr. Rourke's efforts yielded nothing. At length, one of the students, a lanky fellow with thick glasses and a baseball cap, straightened up, eyes shining. "Dr. Rourke, I'm getting multiple signals in a cluster," he announced, pointing to an area near a partly exposed root system. She hurried over, adjusting the instrument. "Let's see what we have." Carefully, they sank their small trowels into the dark earth, scraping away layer by layer. Bill's heart pounded. He recalled stories of how stray bullets or half-buried canteens could prove a battlefield's existence. If they unearthed definitive artifacts, Sagemont might be forced to halt the pipeline's route. Several minutes later, Dr. Rourke drew in a sharp breath and lifted a small, rusted chunk of metal. She brushed away loose soil, revealing what looked like an oval belt plate with corroded lettering. "That's definitely mid-19th century," she whispered, excitement lacing her voice. "Confederate or Union, I can't tell yet, but it's period accurate." Bill felt a surge of hope. "That prove anything?" he asked, stepping forward. She nodded. "Potentially. We need more context. Any uniform remnants or bullet cartridges that confirm a skirmish line. But this is a strong indication that men fought here. Under certain regulations, that can trigger protective status. However," she paused, clearly aware of Colonel Hastings looming behind her. "However," she repeated softly, "military or corporate stakeholders sometimes override historical finds if a significant national interest is declared. I'm no lawyer, Mr. Thacker, but we'll do what we can." Colonel Hastings gave a curt nod, as if acknowledging her statement, without endorsing it. "You have until sundown," he said. "After that, my men need this area cleared to continue site preparations." Dr. Rourke frowned. "That's hardly enough time for a thorough survey." "Then use your hours wisely," he replied, turning away. A hiss of irritation escaped Dr. Rourke's lips as she directed the students to fan out and intensify their search. Bill clenched his fists, trying to mask his anger. The colonel's rigid timelines were stifling even the possibility of a genuine archaeological assessment. All morning, the small team combed the hillside. They uncovered a handful of bullet casings, a rusted bayonet blade, and more belt hardware that suggested soldiers indeed had passed through. Dr. Rourke snapped countless photos, tagged and bagged each find, and meticulously logged coordinates. She paused every so often to mutter about how the presence of the army might actually be ironically relevant, as if it were a modern echo of the violence once waged here. Around midday, Bill offered Dr. Rourke and her students some sandwiches and water. They gratefully accepted, and even Dolly wagged her tail at the new visitors, sniffing their boots. Colonel Hastings' men stood at the edges, ignoring the lunch break. Bill figured they'd have their own rations in the trucks. Still, he couldn't resist offering them some courtesy, no matter how irritated he was. "You boys want water?" he called to a pair of young infantrymen. They glanced at each other, uncertain. "Come on," Bill insisted. "It's near 100 degrees out here." After a moment's hesitation, they approached warily. Bill handed them plastic bottles from his cooler. "You got names?" he asked, trying not to betray the frustration still knotted in his chest. One soldier nodded politely. "I'm Private Delgado. This here's Private Clark. Thanks for the water." "Stay hydrated," Bill said. He wanted to add more, some plea for them to understand he wasn't the enemy, but a tightness in his throat made words fail him. Instead, he patted Dolly's head and moved to check on Dr. Rourke's progress. By early afternoon, Dr. Rourke had compiled a modest but convincing stash of artifacts. "Bill, this is something you should see," she said, calling him over to the shade of a tall oak. She opened her notebook, showing a hand-drawn diagram of the finds. "We have evidence of a possible conflict line about 100 yards wide, and these items," she pointed to the rusted belt plates, "they likely belong to soldiers from both sides, meaning there was a real skirmish right here." "How soon can you get official recognition?" Bill asked eagerly. She ran a hand through her short hair. "That's tricky. We'd need to file with the State Historic Preservation Office, maybe get an emergency designation if the site is indeed threatened by development." "And that would stop Sagemont from bulldozing?" She exhaled. "In some cases, yes. A known battlefield can't be casually disturbed. They'd have to reroute or do extensive permitting, but it's a process, Bill, and processes take time." A commotion broke out near the cluster of army trucks. Raised voices, the crackle of a radio, and then a swirl of dust as a large transport vehicle thundered onto the property. It parked near the edge of the clearing. Soldiers rushed to unload supplies. Coiled razor wire, portable generators, and crates Bill assumed contained more equipment. Colonel Hastings strode up to Bill, his expression serious. "Mr. Thacker, I'm establishing a forward operations post here. If you have concerns, direct them to me, but keep your distance from my men." Bill's blood pressure soared. "Why on earth do you need razor wire? This is farmland, not a war zone." Hastings' posture remained rigid. "I'm taking the necessary precautions. We have reason to believe protesters might come, or vandals who would attempt to sabotage the pipeline's early staging." Bill almost laughed, though no humor graced his face. "The only protester here is me, Colonel, and I carry a shovel, not a bomb. You're telling me your solution is barbed wire and heavy arms?" The colonel's nostrils flared. "We won't discuss strategic measures with civilians." Before Bill could retort, Mark Leland emerged from behind a Humvee, phone at his ear. He ended the call and hurried over. "Colonel Hastings, I just spoke with headquarters. They're concerned about rumors circulating on social media. Activists from the next county might be heading this way." Hastings gave a stiff nod, then turned back to Bill. "If crowds arrive, we'll lock this area down. No one but authorized personnel will remain, including your archaeology friends." Dr. Rourke overheard. "I have a job to do, Colonel," she protested. "I'm here by Mr. Thacker's request, on private property." Hastings looked unimpressed. "I outrank local requests. Don't test me." Bill stepped forward, protective fury burning in his eyes. "Colonel, this is intimidation. She's not harming anyone." "Call it what you want, Mr. Thacker. My orders stand." Dr. Rourke pulled Bill aside and whispered, "We've gathered enough artifacts to argue for an official protective status, but I need time to compile a preliminary report. Let's not provoke him now. I'll take what we found back to campus and expedite the paperwork." Bill hated to see them leave. He sensed that once they were gone, the army in Sagemont would move forward unhindered. But Dr. Rourke was right. A legal route might be the only chance to block, or at least delay the pipeline. He took her hands in his, voice taut with urgency. "Please file it quickly. They're setting up barbed wire. I can't hold them off forever." She nodded. "I'll do my best. Stay safe." The archaeology vans departed soon after. Colonel Hastings's men, now reinforced by more arrivals, began placing poles around the west field, stringing razor wire in a perimeter that reminded Bill of pictures from war-torn regions overseas. Dolly barked at the unfamiliar barrier, as if scolding them for defiling her roaming grounds. Evening fell once again, painting the sky in oranges and purples. Bill found himself dwarfed by towering floodlights the soldiers had erected, turning the farmland into a glaring stage. The hum of generators broke the night's silence, and the presence of armed men patrolling the fences made Bill's stomach churn with dread. He tried to catch Private Martinez's eye as the young man passed on patrol, but Martinez avoided his gaze as though ashamed. Bill couldn't blame him. The entire setup felt wrong. If Bill had any illusions about a peaceful standoff, they vanished in the glare of those floodlights. After a supper of canned beans and cornbread, Bill again carried his tent and cooler to the west field. This time, he found the area encircled by wire and a bored-looking sentry. "I need to get in," Bill stated calmly. "That's my campsite." The sentry shrugged. "Orders are to restrict civilian access after sunset. You can't pass." A pulse of outrage seared Bill's cheeks. "This is my land," he said, barely containing his fury. "I have every right." "Not anymore," the soldier said, though his tone was guarded, almost regretful. "Until further notice, the area is under federal control." Bill realized he was shaking. "You're claiming eminent domain with no warning? No hearing?" No answer came, just the soldier's apologetic stare. Bill turned and walked away, Dolly at his heels. 1,000 thoughts raged in his mind, but none could quell the sense of helplessness. He tried to phone his attorney, an old friend from high school, but only reached a voicemail. He left a quick message, voice trembling with barely suppressed anger. Night fell fully, and Bill found himself dozing fitfully in a rocking chair on his back porch, Dolly curled at his feet. A soldier's silhouette occasionally darted by, floodlights sweeping the fields. The rhythmic clang of metal on metal hinted that they were erecting something else deeper in the field. Probably more fences, Bill guessed. Near midnight, a rumbling deeper than the bulldozer's engines echoed across the farmland. Bill stood, heart pounding. He saw under the glare of the floodlights a line of tanks rolling through the far gate, sleek, powerful vehicles that had no place among these crops. He dashed off the porch, ignoring Dolly's frantic barks. Reaching the wire barrier, he gripped it, hands trembling. A half-dozen tanks ground their way across the plowed dirt, churning the soft earth. They assembled near the battered oak, turrets pointed skyward, a surreal silhouette under the artificial glow. Colonel Hastings appeared, stepping up to Bill from the inside of the fence. The older man's face remained expressionless. "I warned you we'd bring in additional assets if this site was threatened. We got word that a protest group might be en route. I'll do what's necessary to secure the pipeline zone." Bill stared in disbelief. "Tanks on my farm, against unarmed protesters? Against me?" Hastings' voice was cool as steel. "It's about deterrence. We have a job to do." Rage, sorrow, and disbelief formed a knot in Bill's throat. He forced himself not to lash out physically. "You can't keep me off my own land, Colonel," he said, voice quivering. "I'll find a way." "I don't recommend it," Hastings replied. "Get some rest, Mr. Thacker. Tomorrow's going to be a busy day." He turned and walked away, leaving Bill clutching the razor wire, tears of frustration burning at the corners of his eyes. Dolly whined, pressing against Bill's leg, as though she sensed his heartbreak. For a long time, Bill stood there, watching the tanks idle under the floodlights, uncertain how to protect the soil that had shaped him from boyhood. He thought of Dr. Rourke's evidence, the old belt plates and rusted bayonet, and how that discovery might be his final lifeline. If only the bureaucracy would move fast enough to issue an injunction. If it didn't, Bill dreaded that the next time he saw those bulldozers, they might be escorted by an even larger military force, ready to tear through centuries of family history. Short of a miracle, Bill would have no choice but to witness the land's destruction. He let go of the wire and trudged back to his porch, Dolly at his side. In the distance, the tank's engines rumbled like thunder, and Bill wondered if the approaching storm was one even he couldn't weather. Bill awoke at dawn to the sound of heavy engines grumbling beyond the razor wire. He'd slept in the rocking chair, too worried to bother with his bed. His back ached, and Dolly nosed his boot, urging him into motion. With bleary eyes, he stood and gazed toward the west field. The morning sun cast the barbed perimeter in stark relief, and beyond it, the hulking shapes of tanks and trucks. It felt unreal, as if overnight his farm had become someone else's hostile territory. He brewed coffee on the old wood stove, glancing around the kitchen at old photographs. One showed his grandfather in suspenders, leaning on a pitchfork beside a mule-drawn plow. Another depicted Bill's father returning from the war, uniform crisp, the orchard in bloom behind him. They were men who had served their country but never expected their own homeland to threaten them in return. Gripping his mug, Bill closed his eyes and swallowed hard. The weight of their legacy pressed upon him. Before he stepped outside, his phone rang, a jarring tone in the quiet. He scrambled to answer, hoping it might be Dr. Rourke with urgent news. Instead, the caller ID showed a local reporter, Shelby Crane. Bill knew her slightly. She was a freelance journalist who sometimes covered rural stories. He hesitated before picking up. "Hello?" Her voice crackled, excited, yet measured. "Mr. Thacker, I got wind of a rumor that the U.S. Army has tanks on your farm. Is that true?" Bill let out a soft grunt. "Yes, ma'am. They're here for Sagemont's pipeline. Don't know if they plan to dig or shoot, but they're here." "That's unbelievable," Shelby said. "I'd like to come by if you'll let me, to do a piece on it. People need to know what's happening. The local news stations might ignore this, but I won't. Would you talk to me on record?" He stared at Dolly, seeing in her dark eyes the same confusion he felt. "Sure," he said, deciding that shining a light on the situation might be his best chance. "But watch yourself. The Army's got fences all around. They might not let you near me." Shelby thanked him. They arranged to meet by the orchard side fence in an hour, where he could pass her some details. Bill ended the call and drained his coffee. Determination flared. If the colonel's men tried to silence him, maybe he could turn to the press. Outside, a group of soldiers was busy laying steel planks for heavier vehicles. Bill stood on his porch, Dolly behind him, and waved politely. No one waved back. He half expected Private Martinez to appear with another reluctant gesture of sympathy, but no such luck. Instead, Colonel Hastings strode across the yard, boots kicking up dust. He stopped at the base of the porch steps. "Morning," Bill said, voice tense. "Morning," the colonel replied, eyeing Dolly. "Have you seen or heard any sign of protesters?" Bill shook his head. "No. Just a neighbor or two driving by. It's quiet out here usually." Hastings surveyed the orchard. "We have reason to believe a group of environmental activists could arrive today. We'll maintain heightened security." "Let them come," Bill answered. "They'll be unarmed and outraged, but not violent. This is farmland, not a battlefield." Hastings gave a tight shrug. "Can't take chances. Our orders are clear." "Whose orders, Colonel?" Bill pressed. "Where do they come from?" The colonel didn't answer. Instead, he turned on his heel and marched away, barking instructions at a subordinate. Bill felt a flash of helpless anger. He climbed down from the porch, circled the property until he reached the orchard fence. 10 minutes later, a weathered sedan pulled up on the narrow roadside. Out stepped Shelby Crane, camera slung over her shoulder. She was in her early 30s with short, curly hair and a no-nonsense gaze. Her eyebrows lifted when she spotted the barbed wire beyond Bill's orchard. "Good grief, they really did fence it off," she murmured. "Mind if I record?" Bill shrugged. "Knock yourself out." She flipped the camera on, capturing the backdrop of farmland, wire, and distant war machines. "Mr. Thacker, can you describe the situation?" He inhaled, letting frustration spill into words. "I've lived here my whole life. Sagemont Industries is forcing a pipeline through. Yesterday they brought the Army. They've taken my west field, put up barbed wire, and parked tanks on my land. My land. I can't even walk over to see my father's grave without wading through armed men." Shelby's eyes flicked to the orchard, where branches rustled in the breeze. "That's shocking. Why would the Army back a private pipeline?" "National interest, they say," Bill muttered. "But it feels like a private corporation using government muscle to crush a farmer." "And have you tried contacting elected officials?" "Sure. Called the sheriff, the mayor, even my local representative. They all claim their hands are tied. Shelby panned the camera toward the orchard fence. If you don't mind, I'd like to see the barbed wire up close. But if it's too dangerous... A sudden voice echoed from behind the orchard fence. Identify yourselves! 2 soldiers appeared, rifles slung, eyes wary. Shelby instinctively lifted her camera. Bill raised an arm to show he was no threat. She's a reporter, he called. Just doing her job. One soldier, older than the other, stepped forward. Ma'am, you need to leave. This is a restricted zone. Shelby kept her composure. I'm on public road frontage, capturing images. That's protected under the First Amendment, correct? The soldier frowned. We're securing federal property. Move along, please. Shelby turned her lens to record their faces. Is this farmland federal property now? The soldier glared, anger creeping into his tone. We have an active operation. No pictures of the perimeter. He reached for the rifle strap, not pointing it at her, but the action alone made Bill's stomach tighten. Shelby's voice remained cool. Understood. We won't cross the fence. She lowered the camera but kept it rolling discreetly. Thank you, officer. The soldier hesitated, then gave Bill a stern glance before retreating. Shelby exhaled. Well, that was tense. Are you sure you're safe here, Mr. Thacker? No, he admitted. But I have nowhere else to go. This is home. She nodded, turning off the camera. I'll run this story. Might get some traction online first. People need to see how extreme this situation is. He forced a grateful smile. I appreciate it. They shook hands. As Shelby drove away, Bill stood there, gazing at the orchard fence and the uniformed figures behind it. He guessed Colonel Hastings would be furious that a reporter had come snooping around. Another collision of wills was looming, but Bill decided the risk was worth it. The world had to see what was happening. In the hours that followed, Bill took Dolly on a walk through the portion of land not yet cordoned off, passing the old red barn with peeling paint. Memories of simpler days flooded him. He felt the soil underfoot, a lifeline to all that anchored him. If the pipeline's route cut straight through the west field, how long before the barn was overshadowed by metal and concrete? He paused at the stone markers for his father and grandfather, hidden beneath a weeping oak. The shade was thick, the air cooler. Bill knelt, running calloused fingers over the engraved names. I'm trying to do right by you, he whispered. But they've got tanks and barbed wire. I don't know if I can hold them off. Dolly lay at his side, ears drooping as if sensing his despair. He heard an engine revving across the property, likely more construction vehicles. Without warning, the sharp crack of gunfire rang out, jolting Bill upright. Dolly barked. Fear surged in Bill's chest. He stood, scanning the horizon. Another shot echoed, but it sounded distant. He sprinted toward the orchard fence, heart pounding. As he reached it, he saw a flash of movement near the Army's perimeter. 2 uniformed soldiers crouched behind a Humvee. A figure in civilian clothes crouched by a ditch, hands up. Bill recognized him as one of the local kids, maybe 19, who'd talked about protesting the pipeline on social media. The boy looked terrified. Colonel Hastings barked orders, pointing. Secure him now! Soldiers rushed in, tackling the youth. Bill caught sight of a sign clutched in the kid's fist, something about farmland and water rights. He had no weapon that Bill could see. Why the gunfire? Bill yelled, Stop! He's just a kid with a protest sign. No one listened. Within moments, the youth was dragged behind the wire, out of Bill's view. Another soldier shouted, Perimeter breach contained. No casualties. The orchard fell quiet, except for Bill's ragged breathing. Finally, Colonel Hastings stomped over to Bill at the fence line. We had an intruder, armed with a poster board, Bill cut in. You shot at a teenager? Hastings' mouth became a grim line. We fired warning shots, not at him. He ignored posted signs. This is exactly why we have to secure the zone. Let that be a warning, Mr. Thacker. With that, he marched back, leaving Bill clinging to the chain-link section that reinforced the razor wire. He wanted to scream. Dolly pawed at his pant leg, whining. Bill felt nauseated, imagining how quickly the day could have turned bloody. For the first time, real fear wormed into his heart. If they'd nearly shot a protester, what else might they do? As the sun crawled west, Bill forced himself to go inside and make calls. Dr. Rourke, Shelby Crane, the attorney friend who still hadn't responded. But each call led to endless ringing or short, frantic updates. Dr. Rourke said she'd filed preliminary forms for a historical designation, but the state office wouldn't even look at them for another week. Shelby said she was editing video, but had gotten pushback from local stations. His attorney's assistant apologized that he was in court, promising a callback. Meanwhile, the pipeline advanced, and Bill felt the sting of isolation. By dusk, Bill stood on his porch again, watching strobe lights flicker across the orchard, hearing the low growl of tank engines. In a single day, a protester had been detained, a reporter nearly threatened, and the Army had fired warning shots on farmland that once echoed only with the gentle rustle of leaves and birdsong. Bill thought of his father's funeral years back, how the entire county had come to show respect. It felt like a different world now. Through the chain-link fence, soldiers paced with rifles, strangers who had turned his land into a warlike zone. He sat heavily in his rocking chair, Dolly at his feet, and tried to clear his mind. If Dr. Rourke's paperwork stalled, if Shelby's piece went nowhere, how long before the bulldozers resumed? He imagined the pipeline carving across the hillside, smashing old fence posts and unearthing the orchard's roots. He pictured the bones of his forefathers disturbed by the unstoppable churn of progress. Bill's heart hurt with the weight of it. He leaned forward, pressing his hands to his face. Dolly nuzzled his leg. Softly, Bill murmured, "I'll fight you any way I can, Colonel, but I don't know how much fight I've got left." Night deepened, and the orchard lights glared brighter. Bill refused to go inside. Instead, he sat in that chair, Dolly close, waiting for morning to bring whatever new threat or hope might unfold. Bill woke to the rumble of trucks and the clank of metal, with Dolly's anxious whine as the first warning of a new day's trouble. A bleary look at his watch told him it was barely 6 in the morning. Already the orchard lights had clicked off, replaced by the sun's pale glow creeping over the horizon. With sleep still clinging to him, he stepped off his porch, heart pounding at the sight of more uniformed men assembling by the barbed wire fence. Apparently, overnight reinforcements had arrived, a new set of vehicles, soldiers, and construction crews. If the day before felt surreal, this morning was beginning to look like a siege. He rubbed Dolly's ears, trying to steady himself. "Let's see what they're up to now," he murmured. Her tail wagged uncertainly. Together they headed toward the orchard fence. The metal barrier glinted, slicing Bill's land in two. Beyond it, Colonel Hastings stood conferring with Mark Leland and a team of men in polo shirts who wore Sagemont Industries badges on their belts. Some carried clipboards, others brandished surveying rods. When Bill was within earshot, Mark gave him a curt nod. "Morning, Mr. Thacker." He didn't reply. Instead, he peered at the newest arrivals. One man with salt and pepper hair was barking orders at the others, pointing at the hillside as though planning an invasion. "Who's that?" Bill asked sharply, nodding at the figure in charge. "Mr. Riker," Mark answered. "He's our head engineer. Sagemont flew him in to expedite site prep. We aim to break ground by next week, assuming the Army finishes clearing the perimeter." Bill's lips tightened. "Next week? You're telling me you plan to dig a trench for your pipeline that soon?" "Indeed," Mark said, glancing at Hastings. "We've secured the land per federal guidelines, so there's little reason to wait unless some official order halts us." A sudden wave of dread slumped Bill's shoulders. Dr. Rourke had warned it could take longer than a week for the historical site paperwork to be processed, and Shelby Crane's coverage might not move quickly enough to stir the public into action. Anger bubbled. You can't just stomp your boots on everything. That field might be historically protected. It's not just me telling tall tales." Hastings folded his arms, expression unchanged. "Until we see a signed injunction or recognized historical status, Sagemont's allowed to proceed. We're prepared to hold this ground however long is necessary. Our orders remain absolute." Before Bill could retort, a flash of motion drew his attention. Two of the polo-shirted surveyors trudged through the orchard, planting stakes in the soil. The sound of hammering reverberated in the morning quiet. Bill's gut twisted. This was the final step before clearing a path. That path would lead straight through the old oak grove where his ancestors lay. He pictured the bulldozer's blade slicing into that hallowed space, uprooting ancient roots and turning bones to rubble. In a surge of desperation, Bill grasped the fence and shouted to the surveyors, "Stay away from that oak by the hillside. You hear me?" They paused only briefly, sparing him a puzzled look. Then, with Mark gesturing, they resumed their methodical marking. Colonel Hastings watched, stone-faced. Dolly barked once, as though echoing Bill's protest. Suddenly, from the far side of the orchard, a commotion rippled across the farmland. Bill glimpsed a small group of people emerging from the dirt road, carrying signs. There were maybe 6 or 7 in total, locals from the look of them, plus a few younger faces he didn't recognize. They approached the barbed wire perimeter, chanting slogans about preserving farmland, about corporate greed and environmental justice. One man in overalls raised a battered sign that read, "Stop the pipeline." Mark frowned. "More trespassers?" "They're on public property near the road," Bill snapped, "and it's their right to protest." Hastings lifted a hand, signaling a squad of soldiers. "Let's keep them from entering. Non-lethal measures if they push in." They hustled forward, forming a line just beyond the orchard boundary. A swirl of fear seized Bill's chest. He recalled how quickly the army had fired warning shots at that lone protester yesterday. He hurried in that direction, Dolly at his heels. As he reached the orchard gate, one soldier blocked him with an outstretched arm. "No entry." "I'm trying to prevent violence," Bill growled, pushing past. The soldier hesitated, uncertain. Bill marched onto the dusty road where the protesters had gathered, brandishing their homemade signs. Colonel Hastings trailed behind, jaw tight, as if ready to intervene. "Folks," Bill said, raising both hands to hush them, "I appreciate what you're doing, but these men are on a hair trigger. They already shot at a kid yesterday. Warning shots, they claimed. I don't want you risking your lives." A tall woman with braided hair stepped forward. "We're not backing down, Mr. Thacker. I saw that reporter's video. Tanks on farmland? This is out of control." She gestured at the uniformed line, which had begun fanning out, rifles slung. "They can't scare us all." An older man in a tractor cap nodded vigorously. "Darn right. We need to stand with you. If they push in, we'll push back." Bill's pulse thumped. He admired their solidarity, but feared the cost. "They have the upper hand," he cautioned. "It's not that I don't want your support. I just don't want anyone hurt." The tall woman shook her head. "If we don't stand here, how many more farms will they seize in the name of so-called progress? Sometimes you have to take a stand." Murmurs of agreement rippled. Bill felt a surge of conflicting emotions. The land was dear to him, but so were the lives of these well-meaning neighbors and strangers alike. Colonel Hastings, now flanking Bill, cleared his throat. "All unauthorized gatherings must disperse immediately. We have a zero-tolerance policy toward trespassing or sabotage." The protesters glared at him, brandishing their signs and chanting more loudly. Dolly barked, unsettled by the rising tension. Bill's heart hammered. Scenes of tear gas and riot shields flickered in his mind, something he'd only seen on the news. He never believed it could happen on his farm's dirt road. Suddenly, Mark Leland appeared behind the colonel, phone in hand. "The situation is on live social media," Mark said, lips pressed thin. "We're trending in the region. Sagemont's HQ wants a quick resolution." Hastings surveyed the protesters, scowl deepening. We can't let them approach the fence. Let's push them back onto the main road. If they refuse, we'll deploy non-lethal munitions. Bill spun around. Colonel, hold on. These folks are just chanting. They haven't advanced or threatened property. The colonel's expression was hard. They're within operational bounds. I can't risk infiltration. Infiltration? It's a handful of locals, Colonel. Bill's voice cracked with exasperation. Hastings raised a hand to the nearest soldier, a silent command. The soldier pulled out a bullhorn. A mechanical voice boomed. This is a restricted area under federal jurisdiction. Disperse now or face arrest. Fright flickered in the eyes of some protesters, but others stood firm, signs raised defiantly. The tall woman bellowed, We won't leave. You can't do this on American soil. A rumble of agreement followed. Colonel, Bill tried again. I can talk them down. Give me 5 minutes. Mark Leland frowned. 5 minutes could let them cause damage. Damage to what? Bill snarled. Your barbed wire. Hastings fixed him with a cold stare. A tense beat passed, then he gave a curt nod. Fine, 5 minutes. Then we clear them out. With Dolly trotting behind, Bill moved to the group. He lowered his voice. I'm not telling you to abandon me, but you see that line of rifles. They won't hesitate. Please go home before somebody gets shot. The tall woman gripped her sign. Is that how we fix things? By running away? Don't you want us here? I appreciate your solidarity, truly, Bill murmured. But the cost could be too high. A younger man, maybe early 20s, wiped sweat from his brow. We can't keep letting them walk all over us. Pipelines ruin farmland. Poison water. If we don't stand, nobody else will. Others shouted agreement, though Bill saw fear behind their conviction. Dolly whined, as if sensing the standoff was about to boil over. Bill glanced at Colonel Hastings. The man tapped his watch. Time was running out. Swallowing the lump in his throat, Bill clasped the tall woman's arm. Ma'am, I've got historians trying to label this land a historic site. That might be our best shot to stop them. But if you stay, this place might turn into a scene of violence. I beg you, I don't want blood on my soil. Her eyes glistened. She bit her lip, turning to the others. Y'all hear him? The man's asked us to stand down. Grudgingly, a few protesters nodded. The old man with the tractor cap spat at the ground in disgust. I hate giving them the field, but I don't want to get kids shot. The younger man's shoulders slumped, frustration twisting his face. They can't keep us from protesting in town, though. Bill exhaled. You do that. Protest in the courthouse square. Talk to reporters, spread the word. Make them see how wrong this is. Just don't put yourselves in these rifles' crosshairs. They muttered among themselves. Slowly, they began stepping back toward the main road. Bill saw heartbreak and anger in their faces, a reflection of his own turmoil. Colonel Hastings lowered his arm, signaling his squad to stand down. No tear gas or bullets flew. Still, Bill felt no relief, only a hollow ache that it had come to this. Within minutes, the group had dispersed, trudging away under the sun. Mark Leland typed furiously on his phone, likely informing Sagemont's HQ that the threat had passed. The soldiers resumed their guard positions. Bill trudged toward the orchard fence, Dolly trailing sadly. Hastings intercepted him. You handled that well, the colonel remarked, sounding almost civil. Less trouble for everyone. Bill's anger flared. There shouldn't be troops on farmland in the first place. These are neighbors, not terrorists. You nearly used force on them. Hastings' jaw tightened. We must secure the mission. Civilian emotions don't change that. Civilian emotions, Bill echoed bitterly. You talk like we're in some war zone overseas. This is Tennessee. People here aren't your enemies. He turned his back on the colonel and stomped off before he said something he'd regret. Dolly stayed close, panting with anxiety. Near the barn, Bill paused to watch the Sagemont survey team continuing their work. oblivious to the near clash that had just occurred. Riker, the engineer, gestured with broad sweeps of his arm, describing how the pipeline route would curve around the orchard. As Bill's eyes followed Riker's pointing, he realized with dread that the pipeline would pass alarmingly close to the oak where his father rested. Despair weighed on him. He recalled Dr. Rourke's vow to push the historical site angle, but there was no guarantee the state would act in time. Press coverage might help, but so far the Army's presence had only escalated. Meanwhile, the everyday routines of his farm, checking fences, feeding livestock, were practically impossible. He felt trapped, overshadowed by men with guns and suits with legal papers. Entering the barn, Bill rummaged in a battered trunk for something to anchor his courage. He found an old photograph of his father, standing tall in uniform after returning from the Pacific Theater. Beside it was a letter from an ancestor who had fought in the Civil War, describing the farmland's beauty. Bill's heart twisted. They had fought for their country, and now that very military threatened to bulldoze their resting place. He slumped onto a wooden crate, Dolly pressing her head against his leg. "I can't keep bowing my head," he said softly, voice trembling. "But how do I stand up to an entire army?" The question echoed in the dusty barn, offering no answers. Outside, the clang of stakes being driven into the soil continued. The pipeline route, hammered out yard by yard, left Bill feeling the unstoppable creep of an enormous machine devouring his land. He stared at Dolly, who gazed back with worried eyes. At last, Bill rose, tucking the photograph and letter into his shirt pocket as if they were talismans. "If they come with bulldozers tomorrow," he whispered, "I'll be in front of them again. Maybe it won't matter, but I have to try." He stepped out into the harsh sunlight. Riker's men were already packing their gear for the day. Soldiers patrolled the orchard perimeter. Colonel Hastings conferred with Mark Leland near a jeep. The entire spectacle radiated finality, like a noose tightening. Bill inhaled, summoning every ounce of resolve. No matter how tired, how frightened, he would face them again in the morning. It was, after all, his farm. From behind the barn's open doors, Bill heard the approach of footsteps crunching on gravel. He braced himself for Colonel Hastings' usual stony glare or Mark Leland's clipped remarks. Instead, Private Martinez appeared, eyes darting anxiously around as if making sure no one else was within earshot. Dolly raised her head, tail wagging once before returning to a subdued posture beside her master's feet. Bill straightened, curious about why the soldier had ventured here alone at dusk. Martinez looked younger than Bill had first assumed, maybe early 20s, and his uncertain expression suggested whatever he had to say might be important. "Mr. Thacker," Martinez said, voice hushed, I need to talk to you about what's going on." He hesitated, scanning the dimly lit interior of the barn. "It's not official or anything, but I can't stand by and watch without letting you know what they're planning next." Bill lowered the shovel he'd been using to scoop feed. He felt a flicker of hope. "Go on, son. I'm all ears." The private sighed. "I overheard Colonel Hastings on a call with some top brass. They want to break ground on the pipeline tomorrow at sunrise, before that historical claim can gain traction. The colonel's under orders to ensure the route is fully cleared for the bulldozers. They plan to remove you physically if you interfere again." Bill's throat tightened. "Thanks for telling me, but I'm not leaving my farm." Martinez nodded. "I had a feeling you'd say that." Glancing at the barn doors, he continued softly. "They're bringing in more troops from a nearby base, and there's talk of blocking all roads so no new protesters can arrive. They want to do it fast and quiet, so there's minimal public outcry." A chill ran along Bill's spine. He thought of Dr. Rourke's artifacts, the possible battlefield under his soil. He thought of Shelby Crane's attempts to expose the fiasco, and yet none of it would matter if Sagemont destroyed the site before the state recognized it. "I appreciate the warning, Martinez," Bill said, "but there's nowhere for me to go." If they try to dig up my father's grave, they'll have to get me out of the way first." Martinez's eyes flickered with sympathy. "I know. I don't have the authority to stop it. But maybe you can call that reporter. Or someone bigger. He paused, uncertain. "I don't want to see innocent blood spilled." Bill placed a calloused hand on the soldier's shoulder. "Thank you, son. You're braver than your colonel for coming here." Dolly nuzzled Martinez's boots, as if in agreement. The young man nodded, then hurried off into the twilight, leaving Bill feeling both gratitude and dread swirling in equal measure. He strode to his house, mind churning with the knowledge that by sunrise the bulldozers would push forward. Dolly trotted at his side, ears alert. Stepping into the kitchen, Bill snatched his phone off the table, scanning for Shelby Crane's number. He dialed, heart pounding faster with each unanswered ring. Finally, her voicemail clicked on. "Shelby, it's Bill Thacker. They're moving tomorrow at dawn. Tanks, bulldozers, the works. I need you here if you can make it. I'm not sure what else to do." He ended the call, cursing under his breath at the intangible quiet that followed. Then he tried Dr. Rourke's line, but it too went to voicemail. With no immediate lifeline, he set the phone on the counter, gripping its edge until his knuckles whitened. Tomorrow could be the end of everything he'd fought for. Crouching beside Dolly, he murmured, "We'll do what we have to do. Not one step back." The dog licked his hand, a gesture of unspoken comfort. That night, Bill scarcely slept. He paced the house, one ear cocked for the whine of engines. In a fit of desperation, he considered gathering the old hunting rifle from the closet. Yet, what would that accomplish except violence and tragedy? He shook off the temptation, refusing to become exactly what they wanted. A threat. By 3 a.m, he dozed off in the worn recliner, dogged by nightmares of bulldozers plowing over grave markers. At the first glimmer of light, Dolly barked, rousing Bill. He hastily pulled on his boots and stumbled outside. A bleak dawn greeted him, the sky bruised purple along the horizon. Then came the mechanical roar of heavy machinery. Bill's heart sank. Time had run out. He rushed toward the orchard fence. Soldiers stood in formation, rifles at the ready. Just behind them, Mark Leland and Mr. Riker conferred with Colonel Hastings. Then Bill saw the bulldozers, 3 of them lined up like steel beasts revving for an attack. Their blades were lowered, poised to slice the earth. Dolly bounded ahead, barking furiously at the mass of vehicles. Bill reached the wire barrier. "Colonel, don't do this!" he shouted over the engine noise. "There's a formal request for historical status." Hastings, face unreadable, raised a hand. "We have no such official directive. Sedgemont's permits stand. Clear the area, Mr. Thacker." The lead bulldozer lurched forward, rolling slowly toward the orchard. Bill's pulse hammered. He grabbed the chain link, wrestling with it as if he could tear it down by raw will. Dolly snarled, leaping at the fence. Behind the dozers, Bill spotted the hulking silhouettes of 2 tanks, flanking the operation like sentinel guardians. It was madness, all of it. Bill struggled to keep his voice steady. "Let me talk to Riker. I'll buy the land around the pipeline route. I'll pay whatever I can. Just spare the hillside." Riker, hearing Bill's plea, paused. He walked closer, escorted by a soldier. "Mr. Thacker, the route is finalized. Relocating at this stage would cost Sagemont millions. The pipeline schedule is tight. I'm sorry, but it's out of my hands." "Please," Bill whispered. "That oak is over my father's grave. I'll never forgive myself if you tear it down." Riker's gaze flickered, but then hardened. "If you're truly concerned, try going to corporate. But right now, my job is to build." He turned away, giving a curt nod to the bulldozer operators. Bill watched, horror flooding his veins, as the machines advanced. Swallowing the knot in his throat, Bill realized he had one move left. He sprinted along the fence to the orchard gate, where a soldier blocked his path. Dolly barked like mad, dancing at Bill's feet. Bill faced the soldier, chest heaving. That dozer is about to plow my father's grave. I won't let that happen. You can either shoot me or let me stand on my land." The soldier's eyes tightened with sympathy, but he said nothing. Bill shoved past, ignoring a startled shout. He dashed into the orchard, Dolly racing alongside. Colonel Hastings bellowed, "Stop him!" But Bill was already weaving between the fruit trees, heart galloping. He glimpsed the bulldozer's silhouette beyond the orchard's edge, churning forward. The second dozer started its engine, and the combined roar shook the morning air. A soldier lunged from behind a trunk, trying to grab Bill, but Dolly snapped at his heels, distracting him long enough for Bill to slip away. He emerged onto the slope leading to the old oak, chest burning from the sprint. The ground rumbled as the lead bulldozer climbed the gentle rise. Soldiers pounded after Bill, boots thudding. Bill threw himself in front of the dozer. Dolly snarled, fur bristling. The machine halted momentarily, its driver peering down in alarm. Bill spread his arms wide. "You'll have to run me over first." Colonel Hastings, flanked by heavily armed troops, stormed up behind him. "Stand down, Mr. Thacker, or we'll restrain you." Bill's voice rose, a ragged cry. "Go ahead and restrain me." "I won't watch you desecrate this land," Dolly barked, as if echoing his challenge. The bulldozer's engine idled, metal treads grinding the soil. The tension hung like a taut wire, ready to snap. Hastings nodded curtly. Two soldiers lunged forward, seizing Bill's arms. Dolly launched herself at them, but a third soldier deftly subdued the collie with a net-like tool. Bill fought, rage and heartbreak fueling his thrashing. He glimpsed Mark Leland and Mr. Riker, watching in the distance, their faces drawn. The dozer driver, looking down from his cab, wore an expression of pity. Then Colonel Hastings barked, "Proceed!" The bulldozer lurched forward again. Bill, pinned by two soldiers, let out a guttural shout. Dolly whined, tangled. The dozer's giant blade tore into the hillside. Clumps of grass and topsoil rolled aside, scattering in dusty plumes. Bill's vision blurred with tears as he realized it was happening. There was no stopping them. The soldier pinned him forcefully, and Bill could only watch the blade's relentless crawl toward the oak. The ancient tree that shaded his father's grave wavered in the swirling dust, and then, with a sickening jolt, the dozer's blade struck a gnarled root. Bill howled, "No!" The operator reversed slightly, adjusted the blade, then pushed forward. Splinters of wood crunched, and the oak groaned like a wounded creature. Its trunk wavered. Soldiers watched silently, some grimacing, others impassive. Bill choked on dust, horror consuming him. Suddenly, a distant roar came from behind the orchard. Everyone froze. It wasn't another bulldozer. This was louder, deeper. A flurry of shouts erupted from the perimeter. Bill craned his neck, tears streaking the dust on his face, trying to see what new calamity had arrived. A second thunderous roar ripped through the air, rattling the orchard's fractured branches. Soldiers sprang into motion, bristling with alarm. Even the bulldozer operator froze, arm jerking the levers to halt the machine's advance. Bill, still pinned by two of Colonel Hastings' men, saw Dolly thrashing against the net, whining in frantic protest. He strained his neck to see beyond the orchard's battered fringe, chest heaving with grief and confusion. That's when the top of a heavy transport truck appeared, barreling down the unpaved access road. It was painted in National Guard colors, followed by a small convoy of vehicles sporting flashing blue lights. In the swirl of morning dust, Bill recognized the shape of a county sheriff cruiser in the lead. Doors flung open as uniformed men and women rushed out, weapons kept low, but ready. At their head stood Wanda Poole, the county sheriff, her face grim under the early sun. "Hold your fire," Wanda bellowed, storming across the orchard's boundary. Behind her, at least a dozen deputies fanned out, flanking a group of National Guard soldiers Bill had never seen before. They wore the same fatigues as Colonel Hastings' men, but the insignias were different, clearly a state-level unit. Their officer, a tall major with stern eyes, signaled for them to form a perimeter. It looked like a direct challenge to Hastings' presence, Bill's captors glanced at Colonel Hastings for guidance. The colonel's face was a mask of shock. He stepped away from the bulldozer, boots crunching loose soil. "Major Caldwell," he barked at the new arrivals. "This is a federal site under U.S. Army control. You have no jurisdiction here." The tall major advanced calmly, nodding to Sheriff Poole. Then he glared at Hastings. "My orders come from the state governor. We received an urgent directive after multiple complaints about an unauthorized military blockade on private land. Seems you overstepped your authority, Colonel." Hastings' jaw tightened. "My mission is authorized at the highest levels. We have a critical pipeline to secure." "What you have," Wanda Poole cut in, "is a county brimming with panic calls. We've got reports of gunfire, tanks in fields, and attempts to stifle peaceful protests. I've worked with the military before, Colonel, but there's protocol for involving the local government in these operations. Protocol you skipped." Bill's heart thudded, half with hope, half with dread. He remembered Martinez's warning that more troops could arrive, but never did he expect a second group from the National Guard, with the sheriff at their side. Could they stop the bulldozers? Or would this clash unravel into something even worse? Still pinned, Bill coughed dust from his throat. "Let me go," he rasped to the soldiers holding him. They exchanged uncertain looks. Colonel Hastings ground his teeth, then signaled irritably for them to release Bill. The men obeyed, stepping back. Bill stumbled forward, dropping to one knee near Dolly's net. A nearby private unhooked the dog, who bounded free, circling Bill with frantic relief. Sheriff Poole approached. "Bill, are you hurt?" Her eyes flicked to the bulldozer's blade, half buried in the roots of the oak. The hillside lay torn, raw earth exposed, one large root fractured like a broken limb. Bill's voice shook with emotion. "I'm not shot or anything," he managed, "but they tore into my father's grave. Look at that oak." She studied the old tree, then turned her gaze to Hastings. "Colonel, this is obscene. Why escalate like this? You brought tanks onto farmland." Hastings' frustration boiled over. "I was ordered to ensure the pipeline route's security. This entire zone is designated for vital infrastructure. My superiors insisted on maximum deterrence. The protesters were becoming a threat." The major from the National Guard folded his arms. "Your superiors might have made a mistake. My instructions say the governor wants this forced occupation to cease until the matter is resolved in civil court. That means pulling back your men and halting construction." "That's not possible," Hastings growled. "We have federal authority. The pipeline—" "Let them hash it out in legal channels," Wanda interjected. "The county has not granted the Army permission to seal roads. Our officers will remain here to ensure no further intimidation. If you resist, Colonel, we'll have a standoff between two armed forces on Bill Thacker's land. That's the last thing anyone wants." A charged silence hung in the dusty orchard. Bill shivered despite the warmth, imagining soldiers squaring off against each other. Dolly pressed against his leg, tail between her paws. At last, Colonel Hastings let out a short, furious sigh. "You want a standoff, Major Caldwell?" "Fine. We have rightful orders from the Department of Defense." "Get your documents," Caldwell said evenly. "I'll review them. Meanwhile, the sheriff and I will hold you to a temporary stand-down. No more bulldozing until this is sorted." Hastings bristled, but Mark Leland grabbed his elbow, whispering something urgent. The colonel scowled and at last gave a reluctant nod. "We'll cease active digging, but we aren't leaving, and we keep our perimeter until further notice." The major seemed to accept this partial concession. Wanda exhaled with visible relief, turning to her deputies. "Secure the orchard's perimeter and make sure no more heavy equipment moves without authorization." They hurried to comply, standing off to the side of the federal soldiers, tension crackling in the dusty sunlight. At that moment, Bill caught sight of a dusty sedan pulling in behind the sheriff's vehicles. Shelby Crane hopped out, camera at the ready. She must have gotten Bill's message after all. Spotting the confrontation, she started filming at once, capturing the bizarre scene: a battered orchard, a bulldozer blade sunk into the hillside, federal soldiers eyeing National Guard troops, and Bill Thacker kneeling by his whimpering dog. Shelby approached carefully. "Bill, you okay? I came as fast as I could." Then her gaze landed on the oak's exposed roots, and her face grew stricken. "They started destroying it, didn't they?" Bill swallowed tears, nodding at the raw gouge. "It's not dead yet, but they tried. I guess there's a respite, thanks to the sheriff and the state guard." His voice wavered with exhaustion. She recorded the scene, speaking in a hushed tone for her microphone. In a dramatic turn, county law enforcement and state National Guard have intervened to halt the Army's forced pipeline construction, at least temporarily. Colonel Hastings barked to Mark Leland, "Keep that reporter at a distance." Mark hesitated, uncertain now that local authorities had arrived. Wanda Poole shook her head. "She can stand where she likes, Colonel. This orchard is private property, and Mr. Thacker has the right to let her film." Shelby gave a small nod of thanks, continuing her documentation. At the edge of the orchard, Private Martinez watched from behind the line of federal troops. Bill met his eyes, silently conveying gratitude. Martinez gave the slightest nod, relief etched across his features. The immediate crisis had been diffused, though not resolved. Over the next hour, the orchard became a hotbed of negotiations. The major and the sheriff insisted on reviewing every last permit that Colonel Hastings possessed. Mark Leland made frantic phone calls to Sagemont's regional offices, demanding clarity on what arrangements had truly been made with the Department of Defense. From Bill's vantage, the conversation was heated and confusing. He gleaned pieces of it. Sagemont had apparently leveraged some obscure national security clause to expedite the pipeline. Federal agencies had offered support, but the state government contested the scope of that support. Meanwhile, the county's stance was that no local consultation had happened. It was a bureaucratic mess, with Bill's orchard caught in the crossfire. While the officials argued, Bill bent over the oak's damaged trunk. Dolly sniffed the splintered root. He ran a hand along the bark. The living tissue wept sap, and leaves overhead quivered in the gentle breeze. The dozer's blade had cut deeply, yet the tree still stood, defiant and wounded. Bill's memories of his father's funeral under that very canopy returned in a rush. It felt as though the old oak was an extension of his family line, battered but unbowed. Shelby joined him, voice sympathetic. "I'm so sorry, Bill. This is... well, I can't believe what I'm seeing. Tanks, a two-pronged standoff on farmland. It's just unreal." He let his palm rest on the oak's bark. "Sure is. Never expected I'd need the National Guard to save my father's grave. I don't know what tomorrow brings, but at least they paused for now." Shelby's camera continued rolling. "We'll get this footage out," she promised. "And Dr. Rourke's evidence might add fuel to the story. Maybe public pressure can force Sagemont to reroute the pipeline. They hate bad PR." Bill offered a wan smile. "Here's hoping. Don't hold your breath, they've got money and connections." She nodded, tucking a stray curl behind her ear. "True, but there's power in outraged citizens. People across the state might see this and demand answers. Keep your phone on. I'm going to broadcast a live feed if the sheriff allows it." She hurried off to set up a stronger signal. Bill stroked Dolly's fur. The collie was calmer now, though she still eyed the soldiers warily. "We're not alone anymore," he murmured to the dog. "That's something." As dusk approached again, an entire day lost to back-and-forth bickering, Bill wandered the orchard, scanning the damage. The Army had pulled the bulldozers back 20 yards, forming a neat row behind the barbed wire. Their rifles remained, as did the tanks. On the opposite side stood the National Guard vehicles and sheriff's cruisers, each group eyeing the other with mutual suspicion. Between them, Bill's orchard was a no-man's land, marked by battered terrain and the old oak's wounded trunk. Colonel Hastings stalked over, posture still rigid. "We're at an impasse, Mr. Thacker. My men will maintain a presence until higher-ups resolve this." Bill felt a surge of bitterness. "If only you'd paused to talk in the first place. You almost destroyed everything that matters to me." Hastings pursed his lips. "I'm just a soldier following orders. You think I enjoy this fiasco? We had credible intel about sabotage and infiltration. The pipeline is part of a larger strategy. Supply lines, energy independence. I assumed you were just another protester who didn't grasp the bigger picture." "That's my father's grave," Bill said with quiet fury, pointing at the oak. "That's all the bigger picture I need." The colonel hesitated. For a brief moment, regret flickered in his eyes. Then he turned and strode away without further comment. Bill slumped onto a tree stump, Dolly curling at his feet. Overhead, the dying light painted the orchard in deepening shadows. In the distance, Mark Leland's voice carried as he argued with someone over the phone, no doubt furious that his unstoppable pipeline had met a sudden barrier. By the time night settled in fully, bright floodlights from both sides lit up the orchard, each faction refusing to yield. Bill shook his head at the absurd spectacle. Two sets of American soldiers, separated by 20 yards of farmland, tangled in a political battle. Yet that tension had given him a glimmer of hope. Maybe Dr. Rourke's historical claim and Shelby's coverage would gain traction overnight. Perhaps the state and county intervening would buy enough days for a court to issue a real injunction. For now, Bill found a small sense of relief that no bulldozer's blade would advance further tonight. Exhausted, he guided Dolly back to the house, sidestepping squads of uniformed men clustered near portable generators. He realized that the orchard had become a bizarre campsite for rival troops, each waiting on word from superiors. Though the air was thick with tension, Bill sensed the tide might be shifting. He reflected on how one young soldier's conscience, combined with a sheriff's sense of duty and a governor's concerns, had at least slowed the unstoppable march of Sagemont's pipeline. That alone proved not everyone would bow to might or money. If tomorrow's dawn arrived with another confrontation, he would be there, unwavering. A farmer defending soil that carried his family's bones and the scars of battles old and new. Tonight, for the first time in days, Bill allowed a seed of optimism to grow. He'd seen how swiftly injustice could break a man's spirit, but also how a handful of determined people could hold back even the most overwhelming force. As he climbed the creaking porch steps, Dolly pressed close, as though sharing the silent vow. Come morning, no matter how many bulldozers or soldiers returned, they would both be ready. At dawn, Bill stirred from uneasy dreams, a muddled swirl of old memories colliding with the stark reality outside his window. The orchard glowed under harsh floodlights from both sides, one beam flickering slightly, where a generator sputtered. Despite the National Guard's intervention the previous afternoon, the tension remained as thick as storm clouds. Bill could almost taste the anxiety in the air. He left Dolly curled on the couch, stepped onto the porch, and surveyed the bizarre encampment. To the west, Colonel Hastings' federal troops manned a ragged perimeter of razor wire and posted signs. Their tanks were parked in a neat row, broad hulls glinting. Farther back, near the orchard's entrance, the National Guard vehicles formed a second line. Between them, a broad no-man's land stretched across Bill's farmland, a living symbol of how divided the situation had become. There was movement by the ancient oak. A handful of sheriff's deputies had set up a small table there, presumably for checking credentials or monitoring whichever force was prowling about. Bill's heart lurched when he remembered how the bulldozer had nearly felled that tree. He pictured again the horrifying moment the blade had ripped into the roots, and the pang of helpless rage shook him anew. He couldn't stand idle. With a determined breath, he called Dolly. The collie jumped off the couch, tail wagging, though she seemed wary. Together, they made their way down the porch steps. As Bill crossed the yard, he spotted Private Martinez, standing near a Humvee, helmet in hand, staring off at the orchard. The young soldier straightened when he saw Bill approach. "Good morning, Mr. Thacker," Martinez said, voice subdued. "Glad nobody got hurt last night." Bill nodded. "Me too, son. But I fear today might bring fresh trouble if that pipeline nonsense starts again." Martinez grimaced. "The colonel spent half the night on calls. Word is they're pushing for a resolution from the Pentagon. Meanwhile, your state folks are waiting on a judge's ruling. Everyone's basically stuck." Bill rubbed Dolly's ears, mulling that over. "No bulldozers moved overnight, right?" Martinez shook his head. "We had strict orders to halt all digging until further notice. The major from the National Guard wouldn't budge." That piece of news let Bill breathe a little easier. He thanked the soldier and pressed on, weaving through a line of orchard trees still bearing some early fruit. As he neared the massive oak, he saw the orchard's ground torn and raw, the scars from the bulldozer etched in jagged lines. But at least the trunk still stood. That gave him a shred of comfort. Sheriff Wanda Poole sat behind a makeshift table with 2 deputies, sipping from a thermos. She gave Bill a tired smile. "Morning, Bill. Sleep any?" He shrugged. "A few hours, didn't expect to see you here at sunrise." She patted her thermos. "Coffee helps. We're rotating shifts, making sure nobody escalates. The major's inside that big cargo truck, scanning legal documents. Colonel Hastings locked himself in his command vehicle, doing the same. Feels like we're babysitting 2 brawling families." Bill placed a hand on the battered trunk of the oak. "Better than letting them bulldoze everything. Any word from the judge's office?" "Nothing official yet," she said, glancing at the orchard's boundaries. "But we did hear rumblings that an emergency hearing might happen tomorrow. If so, the judge could issue an injunction stopping Sagemont's pipeline or ordering them to reroute." He exhaled slowly. "Tomorrow might be too late if one side decides to make a move first." Wanda's eyes grew somber. "I've stationed deputies around the orchard to ensure no sudden push. The National Guard is doing the same. Colonel Hastings is stuck unless he wants a direct confrontation with the state. We're calling that a fragile peace." Bill scratched Dolly's neck, letting the collie sniff at the damaged soil. "Then I owe you one. If you hadn't shown up, they would have finished the job." His gaze swept over the farm. "I just hate seeing my land torn up like it's a prize in some power struggle." She nodded in sympathy, swirling her coffee. "We'll keep at it, Bill. You're not alone." Over the next few hours, an uneasy routine settled in. Groups of soldiers, both federal and guard, rotated on patrol, giving each other a wide berth. The orchard became an impromptu command station for legal debates. Shelby Crane arrived with her camera, capturing footage of the standoff from various angles, occasionally interviewing Bill or the sheriff for updates. At times, the tension felt less like a simmering conflict and more like a bizarre festival, with 2 separate bands waiting to see who would strike the first note. Bill spent the late morning on tasks he had neglected, checking his livestock, examining fences along the east fields, verifying that the well still pumped untainted water. Dolly stayed close, tail wagging uncertainly whenever they passed a group of armed men. Bill knew normal farm life was impossible right now, but at least he could reassure himself that his animals were safe. Around noon, as the summer sun beat down, Dr. Marianne Rourke's van rattled up the lane. She emerged in a flurry of anxious energy, graduate students in tow. The look on her face said she carried major news. Bill hurried to meet them before Colonel Hastings' men intercepted her. "Dr. Rourke," he called. "Any luck with the historical site request?" She offered a small, hopeful nod. "We've got strong preliminary evidence. The State Historic Preservation Office is reviewing it right now. I delivered the artifacts to them this morning. They seemed alarmed by the way the orchard was nearly bulldozed." Bill frowned. "Alarmed enough to do anything soon?" "We can't know for sure," she admitted. "But they're aware Sagemont is pushing hard. That might spur them to act faster." Then she gestured to her students. "I'd like to collect more data, if the new peacekeeping setup allows it." Bill guided her toward Sheriff Poole's station. The sheriff greeted them warmly. "We've no objection, Dr. Rourke. The orchard remains private property, and Bill here wants your help. The question is whether Colonel Hastings will let you cross his line." At the mention of Hastings, a short, tense silence fell. Dr. Rourke sighed. "If we can't survey, we can't strengthen the claim. I'll try reasoning with him." Bill spotted the colonel nearby, deep in conversation with the tall major. The two men were clearly at odds, pointing at documents spread atop a Humvee's hood. Gingerly, Dr. Rourke approached them, Bill trailing. Dolly hung back, nose twitching at the tension in the air. "Colonel," Dr. Rourke said calmly, "I need access to the orchard to gather further archaeological evidence. Mr. Thacker consents, so I hope you won't impede us." Hastings' expression hardened. "My orders remain to keep this area secure. We can't risk sabotage disguised as archaeology." The major frowned. "Colonel, the orchard belongs to Mr. Thacker. This is precisely the kind of normal activity we're required to allow." Hastings' lips pressed into a thin line. "Fine, but my men will escort you. Any attempt to tamper with equipment, and we shut it down." Dr. Rourke nodded. "All right. I'm only here to examine the soil and document potential artifacts." She signaled to her students, who unloaded measuring tools and small trowels. Bill joined them, relieved that at least no bulldozers were roaring toward the hillside. The National Guardsmen looked on, curious but unthreatening, while Hastings' soldiers hovered watchfully. For a while, the orchard hummed with a quieter sort of energy. The scraping of trowels, the beeping of a metal detector, the shuffle of boots in the grass. "Found something," announced one grad student, prying up a rusted fragment near the old oak's trunk. Dr. Rourke brushed away dirt, revealing a battered cavalry insignia. She let out a hushed exclamation. "This is definitely from the Civil War era, possibly a saddle badge." She photographed it meticulously, then bagged it, referencing a chart. "Every piece helps build our case." Bill felt a strange mixture of pride and sorrow as the orchard slowly yielded relics of a distant fight. He glanced at Dolly, who observed with mild interest. The collie seemed to sense a shift. Men with guns were still there, but the orchard was not under direct attack for the moment. By late afternoon, Dr. Rourke had tagged several items. "I'll compile these findings into a supplemental report," she told Bill, "and I'll rush it to the Preservation Office. If they rule this is a historically significant battlefield, Sagemont will need a special permit to dig. That permit can take months, or they might have to reroute." "That's all I can hope for," Bill said quietly. "I'm grateful, Doctor." Her brow creased. "Don't thank me yet. Powerful entities sometimes get waivers or hush up the process, but at least we've given them a reason to pause." Just as Bill finished helping pack up, Shelby Crane approached with her camera. "Bill, can we do an on-camera update? My feed is picking up traction. People are horrified by the standoff." "Sure," Bill replied wearily. He faced the camera, Dolly pressing close. Shelby asked him about the orchard's significance, the interventions by the sheriff and the National Guard, and his hopes for the immediate future. Bill spoke from the heart, detailing how the farmland had been in his family for generations, how it contained graves and local history, how unstoppable the pipeline had once seemed, until unlikely allies arrived. Halfway through his statement, Bill glimpsed Colonel Hastings standing in the background, jaw tight. The man wasn't interfering, but his presence was an unwavering reminder that the Army still occupied part of the property. Bill finished by stating, "All I want is for people to see reason. We can't let might make right, not on American soil where the law should protect farmers from corporate greed." Shelby nodded, ending the recording. "Thank you, keep me updated." Dusk settled in again, the orchard lit by the same harsh lights from both camps. Bill lingered under the wounded oak, heart aching at the gouged bark where the bulldozer had struck. A new group of protesters arrived on the public road, carrying signs, but the sheriff's deputies smoothly guided them to a safe zone away from the orchard fence. No confrontation flared that evening, but Bill sensed the standoff had merely shifted from open conflict to tense waiting. As the stars blinked overhead, Bill trudged back to his farmhouse, Dolly at his side. The front yard was again dotted with soldiers from Hastings' command, though now they shared space with the National Guard. Bill caught hushed conversations among them, hearing the words "court order" repeated often. He felt a flicker of real hope that a legal resolution might be near, possibly by the following day. He realized the orchard had never truly slept these past few nights, always lit, always guarded. Yet for the first time, Bill believed that light might hold back total ruin. Drowsy from the day's turmoil, he went inside, heated a leftover stew on his old stove, and sank into a chair at the small kitchen table. Dolly settled under the table, eyes half closed. Bill's mind drifted to the future. If the state recognized this farmland as hallowed ground, if an injunction forced Sagemont to revise their pipeline, perhaps Bill could replant the orchard, mend the scarred earth, and bury the memory of barbed wire and tank treads beneath new growth. The tension might fade, the orchard returning to quiet. Yet Bill knew scars remained. He would always recall how close they came to flattening his father's grave. Still, he allowed himself a fragile smile. Thanks to the sheriff, the National Guard, Dr. Rourke, Shelby's reporting, and yes, even one worried private who'd warned him, Bill had held off the bulldozers for another day. That had to count for something. He patted Dolly's head. "We'll see what tomorrow brings, girl." And in the orchard, beyond the walls of Bill's tired farmhouse, two sets of soldiers stood watch, locked in an uneasy truce, waiting for morning's verdict. Night settled once more over Bill Thacker's farmland, a hush rippling through the orchard where two rival groups of soldiers maintained a tense truce. Colonel Hastings's men still guarded their barbed wire perimeter, while the state's National Guard presence formed a protective ring behind them. Overhead, half a moon cast a pale glow across the battered soil. Bill gazed from his porch, Dolly at his side, remembering the chaos of the past days. Bulldozers ripping oak roots, the sheriff's last-minute intervention, the frantic scramble to preserve centuries of family history. Now, flickering floodlights illuminated the orchard like a stage stuck between acts. Dr. Rourke's newly uncovered artifacts, plus Shelby Crane's camera work, gave hope that state officials might soon grant the farmland provisional historic status. Yet Bill couldn't shake the dread that a higher chain of command might override any local victory with a single order. He stood there for a long time, listening to distant murmurs and the chugging hum of generators. Soldiers from both sides shifted in the half-dark. Some paced restlessly near their vehicles, while others crouched on camp stools, eating rations under the orchard's canopy. The colonel's faction had clearly grown uneasy, uncertain whether their original plan could proceed now that the National Guard and the sheriff had forced a temporary stand-down. Bill suspected that, in their eyes, each passing hour without progress on the pipeline was a black mark on Colonel Hastings's record. Dolly nudged Bill's boot, as though reminding him to rest. He managed a weary smile and trudged inside, latching the screen door behind them. Sleep would not come easily, but he had no choice but to try. At dawn, Bill awoke to an odd quiet. The orchard still glowed with white-hot lamps, but the rancorous shouting of the previous days was absent. Outside his window, dew clung to the grass like tiny crystals. Dolly whined, sensing her master's tension. Bill quickly dressed, pulling on battered overalls, and stepped out to survey the orchard. The battered oak still stood, trunk scarred. The bulldozers sat where they had been withdrawn, and the two tank hulks loomed behind them as silent threats. Meanwhile, A sheriff's cruiser had been parked at a slight angle to block any sudden re-entry by those machines. On the far side, National Guard soldiers were conferring with some of Colonel Hastings' men, rifles slung in a posture of uneasy partnership. Wanda Poole approached, a radio in hand. "Morning, Bill," she said. "We might get that court hearing this afternoon. The rumor is a circuit judge reviewed Dr. Rourke's evidence late last night. If we're lucky, we'll have a formal injunction to stop Sagemont from digging." Her tone carried cautious optimism. Bill nodded, relief stirring even though he knew how fragile these legal levers could be. "I can't thank you enough, Sheriff," he said. "Without you stepping in, I'd be standing on a wasteland by now." She smiled ruefully and headed off to speak with her deputies, leaving Bill to wander closer to the orchard's center. Partway there, he spotted Colonel Hastings, fully geared, conferring with a stern-faced officer from the National Guard, Major Caldwell. They were so focused on each other that Bill lingered back, not wanting to spark fresh tension. He could pick up only fragments of conversation, references to chains of command, escalation risk, and federal-state cooperation. Beneath the formal language, Bill sensed Hastings' frustration. The colonel seemed determined to salvage his original mission. Caldwell, on the other hand, looked unyielding, arms folded. Bill guessed the major had direct lines to the governor, who remained unconvinced that any of this was warranted. Minutes later, Shelby Crane arrived, balancing a small camera rig. "Bill, any developments?" she asked quietly, taking in the orchard's battered scene. "Not yet," he muttered, glancing at the bulldozers. "I'm clinging to the hope a judge can end this." She raised her camera, capturing the orchard's torn earth and the anxious hush among the soldiers. Bill noted that Colonel Hastings shot her a disapproving look, but said nothing, perhaps unwilling to spark another confrontation on camera. The standoff had stretched far beyond the normal scope of a pipeline dispute, and they all knew it. By mid-morning, Dr. Rourke and two of her graduate students returned, escorted by a deputy. She carried a small laptop and a thick folder. "I've sent everything we have to the preservation office," she said, eyes alight with a determined gleam. "Word is the judge will convene electronically with state officials. If that goes well, we could see a directive by lunchtime that legally bars any digging here." Bill felt a spark of hope. "That soon?" Dr. Rourke nodded. "They're alarmed by how close we came to losing invaluable artifacts. If the orchard is indeed a documented Civil War skirmish site, the pipeline must be delayed, if not rerouted." Bill's shoulders eased, though Dolly still paced at his heels, as if reminding them that trouble could return in an instant. The hours crawled by. Colonel Hastings hovered near his command vehicle, phone pressed to his ear. Bill overheard bits of raised voices, references to Pentagon approval and not standing down. Meanwhile, the National Guard major showed Wanda Poole a string of text messages from the governor's staff. Neither side would budge without official instructions. Tension thickened under the scorching midday sun. Bill's orchard felt like the strangest chessboard imaginable. 2 sets of troops, 1 battered farmer, and no clarity on the next move. Just after noon, a sudden flurry of radio chatter erupted among the sheriff's deputies. Wanda Poole grabbed her phone, stepping away to answer in private. Bill lingered anxiously, Dolly whining. Then the sheriff ended her call and sprinted to the orchard table where she'd set up. "Everyone gather around," she called, voice taut with emotion. Major Caldwell, Colonel Hastings, Mark Leland, Dr. Rourke, and Bill all converged in front of the old oak. The bulldozers stood silent behind them. Shelby Crane joined with her camera rolling, clearly sensing a turning point. Wanda tapped her phone screen, adjusting the speaker. A man's voice crackled out, formal and measured. "This is Judge Alfred Ronson from the 24th Judicial Circuit. We are issuing a temporary restraining order, prohibiting any further excavation, bulldozing, or construction on the Thacker property until the court can review the battlefield evidence. Any violation of this order will be considered contempt. enforceable by local and state authorities. A hush followed those words, as if the orchard itself had paused to listen. Wanda met Bill's eyes, nodding in encouragement. Colonel Hastings, eyes narrowed, shifted on his feet. Major Caldwell exhaled in relief. Mark Leland paled, but tried to maintain composure. The judge's voice continued. All parties should note this is an emergency measure. A hearing is scheduled for next week, at which time we will determine whether the orchard qualifies for protection under state historical statutes. Until then, no pipeline construction shall proceed. The order is effective immediately. Dolly barked, almost as though celebrating. Bill felt a wave of relief crash over him, so powerful that his knees nearly buckled. He inhaled a shaky breath, blinking back tears. Thank God, he whispered. At least we have time. Colonel Hastings clenched his jaw. I have federal mandates. I must confirm with my superiors whether a state injunction can override them. Major Caldwell raised a brow. Unless you want a direct conflict with the National Guard and local law enforcement, Colonel, I advise you not to push it. Mark Leland stepped forward, phone in a white-knuckled grip. We'll escalate to a federal court. Sagamont won't abandon a pipeline just because of a belt buckle and some old bullets. Dr. Rourke bristled at his dismissive tone. Those so-called old bullets tell a story of men who fought and died on this land, she retorted. Bill, though burning to shout, kept calm. We'll see what the courts decide, he managed, voice taut. In the meantime, no more bulldozers, and get off my property if you're just here to menace me. Colonel Hastings shot him an icy look, then turned to his men. Stand by for updated orders. We're suspending any further activity. That doesn't mean we're leaving. Major Caldwell signaled a pair of guard troops to remain as well. Wanda stepped between them, arms out, as if physically holding the orchard in balance. Shelby Crane, camera aimed at the group, captured every expression. Bill knelt by Dolly, ruffling her ears, adrenaline still thudding in his veins. He felt the battered ground beneath him, the orchard's battered roots that had somehow survived. This was a victory, if only a temporary one. He recalled the phrase, fragile peace, that Wanda had used days before. Now it felt like the orchard was enveloped by that same fragile peace, a standoff that might reignite at any nudge. Yet the bulldozers wouldn't be allowed to advance. That alone signaled a turning point. As the afternoon wore on, Colonel Hastings received a series of calls. His posture stiffened, but he gave no orders for new moves. Mark Leland paced, muttering about legal channels and deadlines. The National Guard maintained its watch, and the sheriff's deputies took shifts ensuring no unexpected push. Bill finally allowed himself a moment to breathe, leaning against the wounded oak. Dr. Rourke approached, gently touching the gouged bark. We'll see if we can treat this tree, she said. Might consult an arborist. It looks bad, but maybe not hopeless. Bill nodded, voice low. My father's grave stands just a few yards from here. I can't tell you how close I came to losing it all. Dr. Rourke exhaled. History has a way of echoing across generations. Perhaps it was always meant for us to find evidence of an older conflict, so it wouldn't be buried again under another. Bill managed a sad smile. Let's hope we preserve it for good. That night, as the orchard again fell under the glow of floodlights, the bulldozers stayed where they were, engines cold and silent. Colonel Hastings' men set up fewer patrols, signifying that the immediate push had been curtailed. The National Guard likewise relaxed some lines. Journalists from beyond the county arrived, snapping pictures of the orchard and Bill's battered fields. A local TV station even set up a live broadcast, capturing Bill's first calm evening in a week. Inside his farmhouse, Bill warmed a simple meal of stew and cornbread. Dolly dozed nearby, exhausted from the emotional roller coaster. Every so often, Bill peered out the window, half expecting a renewed clash. But each time he saw only the orchard's stark silhouettes under artificial light. Soldiers in the distance, yes, but no dozers roaring or rifles readied. The orchard's hush was more peaceful now, reminiscent of how nights used to be before the pipeline fiasco. Bill realized the orchard wasn't free yet. Sagemont would almost certainly mount a federal challenge. But at least Bill had gained what he needed most: time. Time to muster more evidence, time to gather more public support, time to let reason prevail. As midnight approached, Bill drifted to the old oak once more, flashlight in hand. He found Wanda leaning against her cruiser, arms folded. "Just needed a final look before I turn in," Bill said. She smiled. "Still can't believe we have 2 armed groups on your property, but at least they're not fighting." Dolly sniffed around the oak's exposed roots, as if sensing the faint pulse of life that still ran through them. Bill took off his hat, pressing a hand to the trunk. "Hang on, old friend," he whispered. "We've got a reprieve." From across the orchard, Colonel Hastings stood near his command vehicle, posture tense. Bill thought for a second that he saw regret etched on the colonel's face, but the man turned away too quickly, swallowed by shadows. Bill sighed. If only they had talked before the first bulldozer rolled in, none of this heartbreak might have happened. But there was no reversing that damage. All they could do was wait for the courts and hope a measure of justice emerged from the dusty wreckage of power struggles. Bill closed his eyes. Dolly's presence a warm reassurance at his side, and thanked whatever higher force had stayed the dozer's blade that day. Tomorrow could still bring trouble, but for tonight, the orchard stood guarded by both memory and law, and that was enough. At first light, word rippled across Bill Thacker's farmland that the upcoming court hearing would happen that very afternoon, conducted virtually, but wielding the power to transform everything. Bill paced near the wounded oak, Dolly trailing anxiously, while Sheriff Poole did her best to keep the orchard calm. Colonel Hastings's men hadn't left. They remained at the perimeter with their barbed wire and heavy vehicles, nursing wounded pride. On the opposite side, the National Guard stayed watchful, clearly prepared to block any renewed attempt at bulldozing. In the middle of this uneasy stalemate, Bill stood with Dr. Rourke and Shelby Crane, discussing final details for the hearing. Dr. Rourke planned to present her findings live via video call, bolstered by the artifacts she'd uncovered: Civil War belt plates, bits of weaponry, and that battered cavalry insignia. Shelby would display her footage of the orchard, the scarring inflicted by the bulldozers, and the surreal sight of an armed standoff on peaceful farmland. Beyond them, the orchard's battered soil glinted in the new sun, as if refusing to surrender to shadows. Colonel Hastings received fresh orders just after breakfast, barking them at his subordinates in clipped tones. Though Bill couldn't catch every word, the gist was that the Pentagon was weighing in. The colonel's scowl suggested he disliked whatever his superiors had said. Meanwhile, Mark Leland, wearing the same rumpled suit as before, prowled the orchard's edge on his cell phone. Bill overheard him muttering about contingencies and federal injunctions, with an air of growing desperation. The entire property felt suspended, like 2 boxers forced to circle each other endlessly. Yet beneath that tension, hope flickered. The judge's temporary restraining order still held, meaning no bulldozer could roll without defying state authority. And nobody, not even Colonel Hastings, seemed eager to risk a direct confrontation with local law enforcement and the National Guard. Under the orchard's arching branches, Bill found a moment's reprieve, leaning against the old oak's trunk and letting Dolly sniff for squirrels at its base. The carved-out wound from the bulldozer still throbbed in his heart, but at least the tree still stood, fighting to heal. By noon, equipment for the virtual hearing was set up in Bill's farmhouse, a battered laptop provided by Dr. Rourke, with a stable connection courtesy of Shelby's portable hotspot. The judge, the state preservation officials, and Sagemont's legal team would all appear on screen. Bill felt a jolt of nerves at the thought of an official proceeding in his humble living room, but Dr. Rourke insisted this was the best way. Sheriff Poole posted 2 deputies by the porch to keep watch, while Dolly lay under the table, her presence a silent comfort. When the designated hour arrived, a beep sounded on the laptop, and Judge Ronson's face materialized, stern eyes peering through thick glasses. Sagemont's lead attorney, Ms. Klein, introduced herself, voice crisp with controlled impatience. Dr. Rourke cleared her throat, starting with a straightforward summary. They had unearthed conclusive relics from an 1863 skirmish, possibly part of a broader Civil War conflict. The orchard, therefore, warranted immediate protective review. Miss Klein tried to downplay the significance, claiming the metal plates were inconclusive. But Dr. Rourke countered by presenting references to historical archives, official battlefield logs, and maps indicating Union and Confederate movement exactly in this region. Bill observed the judge's reaction. Though hard to read, the man didn't appear swayed by Sagemont's dismissals. Then Shelby Crane spoke, showing the judge clips of the orchard transformed into a militarized zone, tanks rolling in, bulldozers chewing into the hillside, Colonel Hastings' men patrolling with rifles. The judge's brow furrowed. "Am I to understand," he said in a clipped tone, "that the United States Army deployed armor on private property to enforce a pipeline route?" Ms. Klein insisted it was a national security matter, tying the pipeline to critical infrastructure. The judge pursed his lips, clearly skeptical. Bill, taking his turn, explained how local authorities had never been consulted, how the orchard contained generations of his family's graves, and how he had nearly been run over defending them. His voice shook slightly, the memory still raw. Dolly, perhaps sensing his distress, lifted her head from under the table and nudged his knee. He pressed a trembling hand to her fur, inhaling for composure. In closing, Bill reiterated that he didn't oppose progress outright, but that the route threatened irreparable damage to both his family's legacy and the region's history. Sagemont, he argued, could relocate the pipeline. Ms. Klein retorted that it would incur millions in costs. The judge stared at her flatly, unmoved by arguments of corporate inconvenience. Colonel Hastings, at the judge's invitation, explained that he'd acted on orders from higher command to secure the pipeline from sabotage. However, the judge pressed him on whether any sabotage had actually occurred. Hastings' expression tensed, and he admitted that the only disruptions had been peaceful protests and a single orchard blockade by Bill Thacker himself. The judge gave a curt nod, concluding that more thorough justification would be needed before the Army or any federal agency forced a pipeline through an evidently historical site. After nearly 2 hours of questions, references to state laws, and repeated clarifications, the judge paused, gazing into the camera. "I see enough here to uphold the restraining order until a formal historical site assessment is completed. This farmland likely meets the threshold for battlefield preservation. I'm ordering a 90-day halt to all construction or excavation, and I request that any federal presence diminish to essential security, pending further negotiations with local authorities. Ms. Klein, if your client wishes to proceed, they must secure new permits that respect both state and federal guidelines for heritage sites." Bill exhaled sharply, heart thudding with relief. He glanced at Dr. Rourke, who managed a triumphant smile, and Shelby, who caught the moment on camera. Dolly wagged her tail as though sensing the tension lifting. Ms. Klein pursed her lips in frustration, but her voice remained polite as she confirmed that Sagemont would abide by the order and revisit its route proposals. Colonel Hastings, asked for final input, said stiffly, "We will comply, Your Honor, though I must clarify our original instructions came from a different chain of command." The judge's eyes flicked with disapproval, but he simply nodded and ended the call. Bill stared at the laptop's blank screen, tears threatening to spill as the weight of the outcome sank in. Word spread fast through the orchard that the pipeline was effectively stopped, at least for 3 months. Some of Colonel Hastings' men appeared visibly relieved. Major Caldwell from the National Guard, who had been standing by in Bill's yard, spoke with a grateful tone to the press, stating that his mission, was to maintain peace and uphold the law. Wanda Poole signaled her deputies to start dismantling the sheriff's mobile command near the Oak. "No reason to keep you on edge day and night," she told Bill, winking kindly. "Though I'll stay close if anything flares up." Colonel Hastings was on the phone again, presumably informing superiors of the judge's ruling. Meanwhile, Mark Leland, face pale, left in a huff, promising that Sagemont would keep fighting for the pipeline. Bill let him go without argument. For once, money and power hadn't won outright. By late afternoon, the orchard slowly emptied, the National Guard prepared to withdraw in the coming days, satisfied that no immediate threat remained. Colonel Hastings' forces were evidently ordered to scale back to a small advisory team, and the dreaded tanks were transported out on flatbeds, grumbling away down Bill's dirt road. Bill watched them depart from his porch, Dolly at his side, hardly believing how the swirl of heavy machinery and barbed wire could vanish so quickly after a court's decree. The orchard, scarred as it was, felt eerily quiet, haunted by the memory of treads and shouts. Before dusk, Dr. Rourke, Shelby Crane, and Sheriff Poole joined Bill by the old oak one final time. Rourke crouched near the trunk, gently measuring the damage. "We'll see about a specialized arborist," she said softly. "Might be able to save most of the tree. The roots are partially severed, but oaks can be resilient." Bill laid a hand on the bark, tears in his eyes as Dolly pressed close. "I hope so," he whispered. "It stood for more than a century. I'd hate to see it go because of corporate greed." Shelby, filming them both, murmured that she'd release a comprehensive documentary piece soon, capturing each step of the standoff and the surprising twists that shaped it. Wanda Poole nodded, praising Bill's grit. "Most folks would have folded when the army rolled in," she said. "But you held on. You forced everyone to take a second look." As stars emerged that night, Bill found himself alone in the orchard for the first time in days. No towering floodlights, no soldiers patrolling with rifles. Just a gentle summer breeze rustling the leaves overhead. Dolly wandered freely among the trunks, sniffing and wagging her tail. In the distance, a single Humvee still lingered near the property line, a vestige of Hastings' scaled-down force. Bill didn't mind. He sat on a low branch of the wounded oak, breathing in the familiar scents of grass and bark, letting the reality settle over him. He had won a reprieve, a chance to protect his heritage, and perhaps ensure a safer future for the farmland that had shaped him. The days ahead would not be simple. Sagemont might return with revised proposals or deeper legal pockets. Colonel Hastings might produce new federal mandates. But Bill no longer felt alone. Dr. Rourke's advocacy, Shelby's media coverage, Sheriff Poole's moral stand, and the National Guard's refusal to let the orchard become a battlefield had changed everything. The orchard's battered ground still held the footprints of men from different centuries, all leaving their mark. Bill understood that defending land, especially land steeped in personal and historical meaning, was an ongoing responsibility, passed down like a precious heirloom. Standing, he gazed up at the star-flecked sky. "We did it, Dad," he whispered, voice trembling. "Grandpa, too. We kept it safe a while longer." Dolly patted over, resting her muzzle on Bill's leg in a soft gesture of solace. He ruffled her ears, inhaling the sweet summer air. With the orchard calm and bright under the moonlight, Bill Thacker let hope bud in his heart. Whatever tomorrow brought, be it another legal battle or a chance to truly rebuild, he would face it unbowed. A farmer who stood his ground and, with a little help from unexpected friends, refused to yield his home to the unfeeling march of so-called progress.